For centuries, the Bible was considered by many to be a sacred but entirely symbolic book, a collection of myths and metaphors with spiritual value but no historical basis. However, as science advanced and archaeology excavated the sands of the past, something unexpected began to emerge. Concrete evidence that many of the events described in the scriptures may have actually happened. What was once treated as a fable is now the subject of excavations, geological analyses, carbon dating, and DNA investigations. And the most surprising part? Science isn't disproving the Bible, it's confirming parts of it. From earthquakes recorded in the Holy Land to stone documents that prove the existence of kings mentioned in the sacred books. We are witnessing a fascinating collision between faith and reason. And if you think you've seen everything, the last item on this list will challenge even the most skeptical scientists, and perhaps even you. Get ready to discover the 10 biblical events that science has already confirmed, and why it changes everything. In ancient times, the world was divided between two types of truth, that revealed by faith and that discovered by science. For centuries, the Bible inhabited the realm of faith, sacred to billions, but questioned by scholars as a collection of moralistic stories. Until something began to change. Archaeology, the science that reads the past through the earth, started to uncover physical traces that, surprisingly, echoed biblical accounts with impressive accuracy. This turnaround began in the 19th century with explorers and archaeologists excavating the Middle East in search of lost cities. What they found was more than just stones. They were entire chapters of the Bible taking on shape, color, and texture. In 1868, the Mesha Stele, also known as the Moabite stone, was found in Jordan. At almost a meter tall, this artifact of black basalt bore an ancient text written by King Mesha of Moab, an enemy of Israel. The most incredible part? It directly mentioned the King of Israel and the House of David, confirming the existence of central figures from the Old Testament. Before this, many scholars claimed that David had never existed. But there he was, carved in stone by a king who fought against his people. A few years later, a new discovery brought the academic world to a halt. The unearthing of the city of Jericho, considered one of the oldest in the world. According to the book of Joshua, Jericho's walls fell after the Israelites marched around it for 7 days, blowing trumpets. A symbolic tale? Perhaps, but in excavations led by Kathleen Kenyon in the 1950s, evidence emerged of a sudden and inexplicable destruction, with walls collapsed outward, something that doesn't fit with traditional attacks, where walls are knocked down from the outside in. Furthermore, traces of fires and uneaten food indicated a city abandoned suddenly, as if something extraordinary had truly happened. Another key piece came with the rediscovery of the Hittites. For years, critics had alleged that the Hittites, mentioned dozens of times in the Old Testament, were a literary invention. After all, there was no archaeological evidence of their existence. But in 1906, the ruins of Hattusa, the Hittite capital in modern-day Turkey, were excavated. Thousands of cuneiform tablets revealed a vast and powerful empire that traded with Egypt and warred with neighboring kingdoms, including Israel. The non-existent people became one of the most studied civilizations of antiquity. Archaeology also confirmed the authenticity of the Cyrus cylinder, a Persian clay artifact with inscriptions that perfectly correspond to what the Bible describes in the book of Ezra. Cyrus, king of Persia, permits the exiled Jews in Babylon to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. The most curious thing? This document isn't biblical. It was written by scribes of the Persian Empire itself, proving that the decree wasn't just an oral tradition, but a geopolitical fact recorded in multiple sources. Other findings further reinforce this convergence between archaeology and faith. The royal tombs of Tel Dan, which bear inscriptions with the term House of David. The ruins of Hazor and Megiddo, cities the Bible claims were destroyed by Joshua, which do show signs of violent destruction around 1200 BC, Hezekiah's tunnel in Jerusalem, excavated exactly where the Old Testament claims King Hezekiah rerouted water to protect the city from invaders. These discoveries changed the tone of the discussion. Before, science was limited to questioning and refuting. Now, it has started to investigate and often confirm. Of course, not everything can be proven, and not all scholars agree on the interpretations. But the fact that so many biblical elements have an archaeological basis changes the game. The Bible ceased to be just a book of faith and also became a book of history. And this is just the beginning. What happens when phenomena described in the sacred texts are corroborated by earthquakes, tsunamis, or millennial geological records? In the next chapter, we will delve into impressive natural events such as the flood, the destruction of Sodom, and even the Exodus, and discover how science has revealed truths hidden under the earth, the water, and time. We've already seen that the Bible left real traces on earth through early archaeological finds. But what about the more monumental events, the miracles, the tragedies, the seemingly supernatural catastrophes? Can science explain, or even prove, that they really happened? The answer is even more surprising than it seems. As scientists look to the past with cutting-edge technology, ancient signs are coming to light, and they align uncannily with biblical accounts. One of the most controversial and debated examples from the Bible is the universal flood. In Genesis, the story of Noah and the ark recounts a flood that covered the entire earth. For a long time, it was treated as a myth, present in various ancient cultures. But in 1999, geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman from Columbia University published a study that shook the scientific community. They discovered evidence that about 7,600 years ago, the Black Sea experienced a catastrophic flood. The water from the Mediterranean Sea would have breached a natural land bridge, invading the region with overwhelming force. Entire coastal cities were submerged, civilizations vanished, and the trauma of this event was recorded in the collective memory of different peoples. It wasn't the whole planet, but it was an entire world for those who lived there. A flood? Yes, and with evidence. Another event that has always intrigued scholars was the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, cities cursed for their corruption and decadence, which, according to Genesis, were destroyed by fire and brimstone from heaven. In 2005, archaeologists found the site of Tal el-Hammam in Jordan, exactly where biblical maps locate Sodom. But what drew the most attention were the signs of sudden destruction. Vitrified structures, materials melted by temperatures exceeding 20 degrees Celsius, and abnormal levels of salt in the surroundings. In 2021, a team of scientists published an impressive hypothesis in the journal Nature. Tal el-Hammam was destroyed by a cosmic explosion caused by a meteorite, similar to the one that exploded over Tunguska, Russia in 1908. The explosion would have occurred just a few kilometers above the ground, vaporizing everything below. The result? A city destroyed by fire from the sky, just like in the Bible. And what about the famous Exodus? The crossing of the Red Sea is perhaps one of the most symbolic miracles in the scriptures. Moses, leading the Hebrew people, raises his staff and the sea parts. Is it possible? Interestingly, studies led by oceanographer Carl Drews, using digital models of wind and tide, showed that under certain atmospheric conditions with strong winds, blowing for hours in a constant direction, the waters of lakes and sea inlets can recede dramatically, forming a temporary passage. The phenomenon is called wind set-down and has been observed on a smaller scale in Lake Erie and in coastal areas of Asia. The Bible says the Israelites passed on dry ground and that the waters returned quickly, drowning the Egyptians. The simulation shows that this is physically possible, especially if the crossing occurred in one of the shallow lakes near the Nile Delta and not in the deep Red Sea as many imagine. NASA, analyzing ancient solar and lunar eclipse cycles, found evidence of a total solar eclipse visible in the region of Judea around the year 29, and it is not an exact confirmation, but it is an extraordinary coincidence. Science doesn't prove the miracle, but it shows that nature sometimes walks hand in hand with sacred texts. Another example that blends faith and geology is the earthquake mentioned in Amos 1:1 and Zechariah 14:5. The Bible recounts a powerful earthquake in the days of King Uzziah. For a long time, it was thought to be a metaphor for divine judgment. However, archaeologists have found traces of seismic destruction dated to around 750 BC in several locations in Israel, such as Hazor, Gezer, and Lachish. The patterns of cracks and displacements in the structures coincide with intense tremors. Israeli geologists, led by Stephen Austin, consider this to be the largest earthquake recorded in the region in the last 4,000 years, exactly during the period described by the Bible. What all this evidence shows us is that science doesn't have to compete with faith. They can coexist and even complement each other. Miracles can have natural foundations. Supernatural phenomena may, in fact, be extraordinary natural events. And perhaps the true miracle lies right there, in the fact that the universe functions in such a way that it allows these events to happen at the right time in the right place to convey a message that stands the test of time. But we are still in the middle of our journey. In the next chapters, we will explore more deeply the invisible mechanisms behind these events, from the symbolic power of biblical numbers to the natural patterns hidden in these ancient narratives. And when we get to the end, you will see an event so precise and surprising that it will completely change your view of what historical truth is and what divine intervention is. After exploring the archaeological evidence and the catastrophic events that coincide with the biblical narrative, we reled to an even deeper question. Do the events described in the Bible follow some type of natural pattern? Or are they governed by divine laws that, to the eyes of science, remain invisible? In this chapter, we'll decipher the hidden mechanisms behind these phenomena and understand how order and logic are concealed even within miracles. What many don't know is that the Bible, in addition to being a spiritual book, is also a work full of mathematical structures, natural cycles, and narrative patterns that repeat with impressive precision. One of the clearest examples is the symbolic repetition of the number 7, considered sacred and perfect. The creation of the world in 7 days, the 7th day of rest, the 7 trumpets of the apocalypse, and the 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine in Pharaoh's dreams. Are these merely literary devices? Or do they reflect ancient observations about astronomical and agricultural cycles? Recent studies show that the agricultural calendar of the ancient Middle East actually followed 7-year patterns. In ancient Israel, the so-called sabbatical year occurred every 7 years when the land was left to rest. This coincides with modern agricultural observations, where soil naturally regenerates after regular cycles of cultivation and rest. Earth science, therefore, already knew, or rather, ancient people knew through empirical observation, that the number 7 was not just spiritual, but functional. Another fascinating pattern is found in the sequence of the plagues of Egypt. At first glance, they seem random and symbolic. But researchers like Egyptologist John Marr suggest that the plagues follow an ecological logic. The water of the Nile turns to blood possibly due to a proliferation of toxic algae, a common event in stagnant waters. This leads to the death of fish, attracting fleeing frogs, then mass insects, and so on. Each plague triggers the next, forming a chain of ecological collapse that, under certain natural scenarios, can be scientifically explained. In other words, the miracle isn't in the breaking of nature, but in its extreme and precise sequence. Another intriguing case is found in the healing accounts described in the Gospels. Many contemporary scholars have analyzed these events in light of psychosomatic and neuroscientific phenomena. In several passages, Jesus says, "Your faith has made you well." Modern research shows that faith, expectation, and the emotional environment deeply influence the immune system and the process of physical recovery. Documented cases of spontaneous remission from diseases like cancer or unexplained paralysis have been increasingly linked to patients' mental and spiritual state. It's as if the miracle operates through the natural laws of the body laws that we're only now beginning to understand. And what about cosmic events? The Bible frequently connects events with signs in the heavens. A classic example is the Star of Bethlehem. Was it a visible miracle or an astronomical event? NASA astronomer Michael Molnar proposed that the famous star may have been the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, which occurred in 07 BC, a very rare phenomenon that would have shone intensely in the Judean sky. Babylonian texts also refer to this conjunction as a symbol of the birth of kings. Modern science allows us to go back in time and identify the exact celestial alignments from thousands of years ago, revealing that the sign in the sky may, in fact, have happened as recorded. The Bible also describes earthquakes at the exact moment of Jesus' death and resurrection. Coincidence? Seismic studies show that the region of Judea is located on one of the most active tectonic faults in the Middle East, the Jordan Valley Fault. Geological records show significant tremors occurring around the year 33 AD. It's possible that one of these tremors was the sign of the cross that split the veil of the temple in two. As narrated in Matthew 27, the religious narrative is intertwined with geology, creating an invisible bridge between what is faith and what is physical. But perhaps the greatest pattern of all is that of historical synchronicity. Biblical characters and events emerge at precise moments of crisis and transition. Joseph is sold into Egypt just before a great famine. Moses is born when the oppression of the Hebrews intensifies. Jesus appears on the historical scene exactly when the Roman Empire reaches its peak and moral decay. These are events that seem perfectly positioned like pieces of a greater plan, or as human responses to laws we cannot name but feel operating around us. At this point, the line between the natural and the supernatural begins to disappear. Science reveals the mechanisms but doesn't explain the why of the synchronicity, precision, and symbolic depth of each event. It's like looking at a symphony. You understand the physics of sound, the movement of the conductor, the material of the instruments, but you can't explain the emotion that it all provokes. If up to this point biblical patterns have been explained by science, what about the more mysterious aspects, like prophecies that seem to predict centuries ahead, or modern events that echo ancient divine judgments? In the next chapter, we'll explore one of these hidden facets in detail: the power of words, prophecies, and the invisible codes that transcend generations and still echo in the world today. Behind the biblical stories, we have seen confirmed by archaeological findings, natural disasters, and historical patterns. There is an even more mysterious dimension, an invisible layer that has fascinated scientists, mathematicians, and linguists: the hidden codes and encrypted prophecies within the text themselves. This is not just about spiritual interpretation, but about literal sequences of letters, mathematical patterns, and messages that, according to some scholars, could only have been inserted with knowledge that transcends time. One of the first scientific studies on this hidden layer emerged in the 1990s when Israeli mathematicians like Eliyahu Rips, a group theory specialist, began applying statistical software to the original text of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible in Hebrew. Using the equidistant letter sequences, ELIS method, they found hidden words and patterns that seemed statistically improbable: names of historical figures, dates, and future events. For example, in the book of Genesis, the word Holocaust appears encoded alongside the terms Hitler, Nazi, and Germany. all found with regular letter skips. In the Book of Numbers, the combination robbing, assassin, and the date of his death were located. Coincidence? For some, yes. For others, it's evidence that the biblical text was constructed with superhuman precision. Critics, of course, warn of the risk of bias. Any long text can contain hidden words if you search for them long enough. But even skeptical scholars, such as mathematicians from Harvard and Yale, have acknowledged that certain patterns in the Hebrew text of the Bible are statistically anomalous, especially when compared with similar works from antiquity. In other words, there's something there that we don't yet fully understand. More recently, with the advancement of artificial intelligence and computational linguistics, new approaches have been applied to the Bible. Scientists are using machine learning algorithms to study the internal structure of the texts, and they're discovering patterns of symmetry, numerical progressions, and informational compression that resemble binary codes or textual DNA structures. The Book of Isaiah, for instance, exhibits an almost perfect symmetry between its first and second halves, something ancient Hebrews could not have done by chance. And what's more impressive, this symmetry reflects central theological themes: fall and redemption, judgment and salvation, sin and mercy. Biblical prophecies, in turn, are gaining new attention not just for their content, but for their historical accuracy. The prophet Daniel, for example, predicted the rise and fall of 4 world empires: Babylonian, Medo-Persian, Greek, and Roman, with a chronological clarity that impresses even modern historians. The so-called prophecy of the 70 weeks describes, based on an ancient lunar calendar, the arrival of the Anointed One, Christian interpretation, Jesus, with a margin of error of only a few years. How could this be possible without foreknowledge of the geopolitical course of human history? Another notable example is in Ezekiel 26, where the prophet declares that the city of Tyre would be destroyed, scraped bare as a rock, and that its stones, timber, and debris would be thrown into the sea. Centuries later, Alexander the Great literally used the rubble of mainland Tyre to build a causeway to the fortified island city and destroy it. Today, that structure is still visible, and exactly as the prophecy foretold. Many of these codes and prophecies challenge not just theological understanding, but also the limits of reason. After all, how can such an ancient text contain such mathematical and symbolic complexity, anticipating events with such accuracy? Science doesn't have all the answers yet, but it's beginning to recognize that the Bible is not just a religious book. It carries within its literary fabric an informational density that challenges even the most modern computational systems. It's as if every letter, every word, and every pause were intentionally positioned, like the code of an advanced system that transmits simultaneous meanings: spiritual, historical, and mathematical. It is no coincidence that many scholars with a scientific background are approaching the Bible not as believers, but as investigators, attempting to decipher a code that spans millennia. But what if these codes are still active? And what if they are more than just hidden messages? In the next chapter, we will see how these discoveries are shaping the modern world, influencing politics, science, and even predictions for the future. After all, biblical events are not just a proven past. They continue to leave living marks on our present. So far, we've seen that many biblical events, once considered legends or allegories, have been supported by archaeological finds, natural phenomena, and even mathematical codes. But what may be even more surprising is that these events aren't confined to the past. Their reflections continue to live on, shaping cultures, influencing political decisions, reconfiguring borders, and even guiding scientific research in the 21st century. The evidence doesn't just remain, it evolves with us. One of the most direct examples is the case of Noah's Ark, which continues to be the subject of expeditions. Scientific Analysis and Topographical Studies. Located on Mount Ararat in Turkey, exactly where Genesis states the ark rested after the flood, there is a geological formation known as the Derupiner Arc. Seen from above, it's shaped like a gigantic boat, with proportions very close to those described in the Bible, approximately 300 cubits in length. In 2023, a Turkish and Chinese team announced the discovery of petrified wooden structures under the soil at the site, which underwent carbon-14 dating tests. The result? The samples are between 4,000 and 5,000 years old coincidentally, the same period in which, according to ancient traditions, the flood would have occurred. But it's not just about structures. The very people of Israel, mentioned for thousands of years in biblical texts, are today a consolidated geopolitical reality. And the most intriguing part? The modern formation of the State of Israel in 1948 coincides directly with prophecies in books like Isaiah and Ezekiel, which predict the return of the Jews to their land after centuries of dispersion. Following the Holocaust and World War II, the world witnessed the fulfillment of a text written 2,500 years earlier. It is no surprise that many political leaders and theologians see this as a modern miracle with deep spiritual implications. Moreover, science has been using the Bible as a map for investigations. Several contemporary archaeologists admit that, despite its religious role, the Bible offers such detailed chronology and geography that it has become a reliable field guide for excavations. The ruins of cities like Ai, Hazor, Dan, Megiddo, and Jerusalem have been explored based on clues extracted directly from the Old Testament. And, in several cases, the excavations have revealed structures described with pinpoint accuracy in the biblical texts. Environmental science is also beginning to dialogue with biblical warnings. In the book of Revelation, plagues, droughts, food shortages, and ecological collapses are described in symbolic language, but with an unsettling similarity to current climate change forecasts. UN researchers have already compared some of the projected scenarios for the future with apocalyptic language. This isn't a matter of theology, but of scientific reality that, in a mysterious way, reflects the same warnings described 2 millennia ago. Another point of connection with the present is the study of the DNA of biblical peoples. In 2016, a group of scientists led by Israeli geneticists performed tests on mortal remains found in excavations in Canaan, a city frequently mentioned in the Bible. The analysis of mitochondrial DNA showed a direct genetic link between the Canaanites and the modern Jewish population, which reinforces the biblical narrative of territorial heritage and ancestry. In other words, biblical characters aren't just literary figures. They left a traceable lineage, and it lives among us. Technology itself has deepened the search for proof. With the use of drones, satellites, and ground-penetrating radar scanning, researchers have found new evidence that was previously unattainable. In 2020, an archaeological group identified a network of tunnels under Jerusalem that may be connected to the original Temple of Solomon. Excavations of this type, guided by biblical accounts, are revealing not only places of worship, but also escape routes, fortresses and inscriptions that had been swallowed by time and earth. And it's not just science that reacts to the biblical evidence. The international legal system, diplomatic institutions, and even armed conflicts are often justified based on biblical narratives. The struggle for the possession of Jerusalem, for example, goes beyond politics. It carries with it the spiritual weight of 3 great monotheistic religions, and they are all based, in part, on the veracity of events recorded in the Bible. All of this raises a question. If so many biblical elements continue to echo in the present, if their characters, locations, codes, and predictions remain active in the real world, can we still treat them only as the past? Or are we, in fact, living inside the continuation of a story that is still being written? In the final chapter, we'll explore a biblical event that until recently was treated as pure mythology, but which, with the advancement of science, has revealed a truth so impressive that it may redefine our notion of time, space, and purpose. After exploring archaeological evidence, natural events, hidden codes, fulfilled prophecies, and contemporary echoes, we arrive at the final chapter. Here, we will reveal a biblical event that for a long time was considered pure allegory, but which modern science is beginning to treat with seriousness and admiration, a phenomenon that challenges our understanding of time, space, and even reality itself. This event is related to the creation account, and in particular, to the idea that the universe had a precise beginning, an initial point of origin, described in the Bible as the moment when God created the heavens and the earth. For centuries, this concept was seen as a truth of faith, contrary to the scientific view that considered the universe to be eternal and without a defined beginning. But everything changed in the 20th century, when physics and astronomy took a gigantic step forward, the discovery of the Big Bang. The Big Bang theory posits that the universe, as we know it, arose about 13.8 billion years ago from an infinitely dense and hot point, expanding and evolving to form galaxies, stars, planets, and finally, life on Earth. This idea revolutionized cosmology, and with it, many scientists began to recognize that the Bible had already anticipated this singular origin of the cosmos. What makes this convergence even more impressive are the details. The term Bereshit in the original Hebrew, translated as "in the beginning," indicates an absolute beginning, not an eternal state. Science today confirms that time, space, and matter emerged together in an event that created everything from nothing, something previously unimaginable. In addition to the Big Bang, another recent discovery reinforces the impact of this biblical event on contemporary science. The observation of the cosmic microwave background, a residual radiation that fills the entire universe like a thermal signature of the cosmos' birth. It is as if we could hear the primordial voice of creation, an echo of the initial instant described in the Bible. But science does not stop there. Quantum physics and theories about multiverses raise hypotheses about parallel realities, hidden dimensions, and the possibility of an intelligent design behind natural laws, a view that surprisingly aligns with the biblical concept of an omnipotent, omniscient, and transcendent creator. And what is most impressive, this same singular creation not only gave rise to the universe, but also established the laws that govern nature, life, and even human morality. In other words, the event of creation is also the basis for everything we know and for the values that guide humanity. Finally, this meeting between science and the Bible leaves us with a profound lesson. There are limits to what the human mind can understand. The mystery of the universe, the origin of life, and the ultimate purpose of existence. The Bible and science, together, invite us to admire this mystery and to continue exploring, questioning, and learning. And perhaps the true miracle is not the proof of ancient facts, but the human capacity to seek meaning, unite reason and faith, and recognize that, amidst so many advances, there is still a vast unknown waiting to be discovered. Thus, this last biblical event proven by science not only confirms a narrative, it challenges our view of the cosmos, invites intellectual humility, and opens the doors to a continuous dialogue between faith and knowledge. Science and the Bible, often seen as opposing worlds, actually dialogue in surprising ways. Throughout this journey, we have discovered that the ancient accounts, far from being just symbolic stories, carry real vestiges, proven natural events, and even mysterious codes that challenge our understanding. What if, after all, the truth is not in choosing between faith or reason, but in recognizing that both complement each other? What would you do if you discovered that what you've always believed might be more real than you imagined? Think about it. The last proven event could change your view of the world forever.